The massive space station Nexus Prime hung in the void like a metallic spider, its countless arms reaching out to dock ships from across the galaxy. Inside its gleaming corridors, representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered for what many considered the most important military exhibition in known space. The Galactic Defense Consortium had called for a demonstration of combat prowess from all member species, seeking to identify the strongest warriors to lead their expanding forces. Commander Zextai of the Vraxian Empire stood before a massive holographic display, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he reviewed the participant list. His species had dominated galactic warfare for over 3 centuries, their natural armor and razor-sharp claws making them nearly unstoppable in close combat. Around him, other alien dignitaries murmured their approval at the impressive roster of warriors. The Corthani Heavy Assault Specialists, announced General Voss, a towering insectoid creature whose mandibles clicked with satisfaction. Their exoskeletons can withstand direct plasma fire. Truly formidable. And the Zephyrian Mind Warriors, added Admiral Nexus, her tentacles writhing as she accessed the station's data streams directly through her neural implants. Their psychic abilities have been known to paralyze entire battalions. Zextai nodded approvingly as he scrolled through the list. Hundreds of species had sent their finest warriors, each representing millennia of evolution toward perfect killing machines. The Gorvani with their ability to phase through solid matter, the thermic giants who could survive in the vacuum of space, the Shadowkin who could become invisible at will. Then his eyes stopped on an entry near the bottom of the list. His membrane-covered eyes blinked several times, certain he was misreading the data. "What is this?" he growled, his voice carrying the deep rumble that had intimidated countless enemies across the galaxy. "Humans? They actually sent someone?" The mention of humanity caused an immediate shift in the atmosphere. Conversations died mid-sentence as alien heads turned toward the Vraxian commander. Then, like a dam breaking, laughter began to ripple through the assembled crowd. "Humans," wheezed General Voss, his mandibles chattering in amusement. "Those soft pink creatures from that backwater world? What could they possibly contribute to a gathering of real warriors?" Admiral Nexus's tentacles writhed in what her species considered deep humor. "I heard they cannot even survive their own planet's environment without artificial coverings. They lack natural weapons, armor, or any enhanced abilities whatsoever." "Perhaps they sent one as entertainment," suggested Captain Mordak of the Silicon Brotherhood, his crystalline body refracting light in patterns that indicated intense amusement among his people. "Their inability to adapt to different atmospheric conditions means they require mechanical assistance just to breathe on most worlds." Zextai accessed the human entry in the database, his expression growing more incredulous by the moment. "It says here their representative is something called a ninja. What manner of warrior designation is that?" The database provided limited information about this human classification. No genetic enhancements listed, no natural weaponry, no environmental adaptations. The physical specifications showed a being barely 2 meters tall, possessing no apparent advantages over any other human. "Look at their homeworld statistics," called out Major Thexan of the Predator clans, his forearms gesturing wildly. "They evolved from tree-dwelling creatures. Their planet has only 1/3 the gravity of a proper world, and their star provides such weak radiation that they require constant nourishment just to maintain basic functions." The laughter grew louder. Species that had been traditional enemies found themselves united in their amusement at humanity's presumption. Tales began to circulate about human inadequacies, most of them wildly exaggerated but accepted as fact by beings who had never encountered the species directly. "I heard they cannot regenerate lost limbs," contributed a representative of the Titan Collective, their massive form shaking with mirth. "A single significant injury can permanently disable them." "Worse," added another voice from the crowd. "They age continuously and die of old age within barely a century. How could such short-lived beings possibly develop any meaningful combat expertise?" Zextai found himself caught up in the collective mockery. His own species lived for over 1,000 years, and their warriors trained from birth in the ancient arts of war. The idea that humans, with their brief lifespans and fragile bodies, could compete with evolved predators was beyond comprehension. "Perhaps we should establish a separate category," he announced to renewed laughter. "Something for primitive species who wish to observe real combat. Without embarrassing themselves too severely, the alien commanders began placing bets on how quickly the human representative would be eliminated from competition. The most optimistic estimates gave the creature perhaps 30 seconds against any serious opponent. Most predicted the human would forfeit before entering the arena at all, once they realized the caliber of warriors they would face. As the crowd dispersed to observe arriving transport ships, none of the Galactic representatives noticed the sleek, dark vessel that had docked quietly at a rarely used port on the station's outer rim. Unlike the massive, weapon-bristling ships of other species, this craft was small, silent, and unremarkable in every way except for the subtle efficiency of its design. From within that ship emerged a figure that would have been utterly forgettable to most galactic citizens. Average height by human standards, wearing simple dark clothing that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The individual moved through the station's corridors with an economy of motion that suggested complete familiarity with three-dimensional navigation in artificial gravity. No identification was visible, no weapons were apparent, and nothing about the figure's appearance would have registered as threatening to any of the galaxy's warrior species. This was precisely the point. For while the galactic military elite continued their discussions about genetic advantages and evolutionary adaptations, they had overlooked one crucial factor in their assessment of human capability. They had never encountered a being trained from childhood in the art of making genetic advantages and evolutionary adaptations irrelevant. The Yacht ninja moved through Nexus Prime like a shadow, observing everything while being noticed by nothing, preparing for a demonstration that would forever change how the galaxy viewed humanity's place among the stars. The grand amphitheater at the center of Nexus Prime buzzed with anticipation as thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the massive arena. The structure itself was a marvel of engineering, capable of adjusting its environment to accommodate the diverse physiological needs of hundreds of species simultaneously. Atmospheric processors maintained perfect conditions for each section, while gravitational fields could be modified to ensure fair competition between beings adapted to different worlds. High Chancellor Vex Mara of the Galactic Defense Consortium stood at the center of the arena, her imposing figure commanding attention from every seat. Her species, the Ancient Ones, had been instrumental in establishing galactic civilization, and their longevity gave them an authority that few questioned. She had witnessed the rise and fall of entire species, making her opinion on military matters particularly valued. Warriors of the galaxy, her voice resonated through translation devices, reaching every being present in their native language. Today we witness the finest examples of combat evolution that our diverse worlds have produced. These demonstrations will determine the leadership structure of our unified military forces. The crowd erupted in approval, the sound creating a cacophony that would have been deafening to human ears but merely registered as enthusiasm to most galactic species. Holographic displays throughout the arena began showcasing the participating warriors, each introduction accompanied by detailed information about their species' combat adaptations. The Vraxian champion appeared first, his massive form covered in natural battle armor that had evolved over millions of years. His claws could tear through starship hulls and his hide could deflect energy weapons that would vaporize most organic matter. The crowd roared its approval as combat footage showed him single-handedly destroying entire enemy formations. Next came the Corthani representative, whose exoskeleton incorporated living metal that could adapt its molecular structure in response to different types of attacks. The being demonstrated its capabilities by walking through a field of plasma fire without sustaining any visible damage, then immediately shifting its armor configuration to deflect kinetic projectiles. The presentations continued for over an hour, each warrior more impressive than the last. The quantum dancers of Nebula Prime could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making them nearly impossible to target effectively. The Void Stalkers from the edge of known space could survive indefinitely without atmosphere, water, or conventional nutrition, making them perfect for extended deep space operations. As each demonstration concluded, betting pools throughout the arena adjusted their odds. The clear favorites emerged quickly, with most speculation focusing on which of the apex predator species would ultimately claim victory. The competition was fierce, but it remained within the realm of conventional galactic warfare understanding. Then the announcer's voice returned, and the tone shifted noticeably. Our final participant represents the world designated Earth 3. From the Sol system in the outer spiral arm, the species calls themselves humans, and their representative claims the designation of ninja. The massive displays showed an unremarkable bipedal figure in simple dark clothing. No visible weapons, no apparent armor, no obvious enhancements of any kind. The being's physical statistics appeared on screen, showing bone density, muscle mass, and reaction times that were utterly average by galactic standards. The silence that followed was more telling than the loudest cheers had been. Then slowly, laughter began to build throughout the arena. It started as confused chuckling from beings who thought perhaps this was some form of entertainment between the serious competitions. But as the reality set in that this was indeed a legitimate entry, the laughter became more pronounced. "Is this some form of jest?" Commander Zextai called out from his position in the VIP section. "Surely the consortium does not expect us to take this seriously." High Chancellor Vexmara consulted her data displays, her ancient features showing puzzlement. "The registration appears to be legitimate. The human government submitted the required documentation and combat assessment data." Combat assessment? General Voss's mandibles clicked in amusement. What could they possibly assess? The ability to fall over without assistance? The crowd's reaction grew more boisterous as detailed analysis of human limitations appeared on the displays. Fragile bone structure that could be easily broken, soft tissue that provided no protection against energy weapons, sensory organs that functioned within an extremely narrow range compared to most galactic species. "Look at their visual spectrum," called out a representative of the photokinetic empire. "They can only see a tiny fraction of electromagnetic radiation. How could they possibly track opponents that utilize broader spectrum camouflage? And their reflexes," added another voice. "Barely adequate for avoiding their own primitive transportation methods, let alone military-grade weaponry." The ninja remained motionless in the preparation area, apparently unaffected by the ridicule emanating from the stands. Observers might have assumed the human was paralyzed by fear or overwhelmed by the magnitude of opposition they faced. The truth was far different, though none present possessed the cultural knowledge to recognize what they were witnessing. In human culture, perfect stillness was not a sign of fear, but of absolute preparation. The ninja was not overwhelmed by the environment but completely integrated with it, aware of every element that might affect the coming demonstration. While the galactic representatives focused on obvious physical attributes, they missed the subtle signs of someone who had spent decades learning to exceed the apparent limitations of human physiology. "Perhaps we should modify the competition format," suggested Admiral Nexus, her tentacles weaving patterns of condescension. "It seems inappropriate to subject such a primitive being to combat against evolved predators. The result would be less entertaining than educational." High Chancellor Vexmara considered this suggestion. The consortium had strict policies about unnecessary harm to developing species, and it would reflect poorly on galactic civilization if they allowed what appeared to be inevitable slaughter for the sake of competition. "I propose a preliminary demonstration," she announced finally, "a simple test of basic combat capability to determine if full participation is advisable." The crowd approved of this decision with enthusiastic vocalizations. Most anticipated a brief, harmless exhibition that would allow the human to withdraw with minimal embarrassment, while providing amusing anecdotes for years to come. The arena floor began to shift and reconfigure itself, creating a smaller demonstration space surrounded by protective barriers. Standard combat drones emerged from floor compartments, their programming set to provide minimal challenge, appropriate for assessing primitive species. The ninja stepped forward, and for the first time, some observers noticed something unusual. The human's movement was different from what they had expected. Instead of the clumsy, hesitant steps they anticipated from a species lacking natural grace, the figure moved with a fluidity that seemed to defy their understanding of human physiology. But the galactic representatives were too busy discussing their evening entertainment plans to pay close attention to such subtle details. The figure known throughout Earth's intelligence networks as Shadow 7 moved onto the demonstration platform with steps so quiet they would have been inaudible even to human ears. Born Kenji Nakamura in the mountains of central Japan, he had been selected at age 5 for a program that existed in no official records. The child who had entered that mountain monastery 43 years ago no longer existed in any meaningful sense. What remained was something far more dangerous than the Galactic representatives could possibly comprehend. The path that led to this moment had begun with traditional ninja training, but had not ended there. As humanity reached toward the stars, so too had their warrior traditions evolved. Ancient techniques were combined with modern understanding of physics, biology, and psychology. What the galaxy saw as human limitations, the ninja clans had learned to transform into advantages. Shadow 7's apparent stillness masked constant micro-movements that kept his muscles in perfect readiness. His breathing followed patterns developed over centuries to maximize oxygen efficiency and maintain absolute mental clarity under extreme stress. His eyes, while limited to the human visual spectrum, had been trained to process information at rates that approached the theoretical limits of neural transmission. The preliminary test began as 6 combat drones activated simultaneously. Each unit was programmed with basic attack patterns designed to challenge primitive species without causing permanent harm. They moved in predictable formations, their energy weapons set to the lowest possible settings, their kinetic projectiles replaced with harmless training rounds. The Galactic audience settled back to watch what they assumed would be a brief demonstration of human inadequacy followed by a face-saving withdrawal from the competition. Betting pools had stopped accepting wagers on the outcome, as no one was willing to risk credits on the possibility of human success. Commander Zextai leaned back in his seat, already composing the report he would send to Vraxian military command about the amusing incident. General Voss began discussing dinner plans with his aide. Admiral Nexus divided her attention between the arena and star charts for her next patrol assignment. The first drone moved toward the ninja with mechanical precision, its energy projector beginning to charge. The weapon would deliver a mild shock, sufficient to discourage further participation without causing serious injury. The drone's sensors registered the human's position and calculated the optimal firing angle. Then, something impossible happened. The ninja was no longer where the sensors indicated he should be. The combat drone's artificial intelligence ran through its targeting protocols again, certain of a malfunction. Its sensors clearly showed the human standing directly in front of it, but when the energy beam fired, it struck empty air. The human had moved 3 feet to the left in the time between the weapon's targeting acquisition and discharge, a span of less than 1/10 of a second. Even more confusing to the drone's programming, the human appeared to have known exactly when the weapon would fire, beginning his movement before the energy projector had finished its charging cycle. The machine's logic circuit struggled to process this information. Pre-movement required prediction, and prediction required an understanding of the weapon's operational parameters that should have been impossible for a primitive species to possess. The second drone approached from a different angle, its programming adapting to account for the target's mobility. This unit employed kinetic projectiles, launching training rounds at velocities that would be painful but not lethal to most species. The rounds were designed to be impossible to avoid at such close range, their speed exceeding the reaction times of all but the most enhanced beings. Shadow 7 moved like water flowing around stones. Each projectile passed through space he had occupied microseconds earlier, his body following paths that seemed to violate basic physics. He wasn't simply dodging the attacks. He was anticipating them with such precision that he appeared to be dancing to music only he could hear. The audience began to pay attention. "How is it moving so quickly?" General Voss asked, his mandibles clicking in confusion. The physical specifications indicated normal human reaction times. Perhaps their data was incorrect, suggested Admiral Nexus, though her tone carried doubt. Or this individual represents some form of enhancement not included in their species profile. Commander Zextai was studying his personal scanner readings, his scaled brow furrowing in concentration. No artificial enhancements detected, no genetic modifications, no technological assistance of any kind. This appears to be a completely unmodified human. The third and fourth drones attacked simultaneously, coordinating their assault to eliminate the possibility of evasion. One fired from ground level while the other attacked from above, their timing synchronized to create an inescapable crossfire pattern. No being in the galaxy, regardless of their species' advantages, could possibly avoid attacks from multiple directions arriving at the same instant. Shadow 7 flowed between the energy beams like smoke passing through a net. His movement defied the aliens' understanding of three-dimensional space, somehow finding paths through attack patterns that mathematical analysis suggested contained no gaps. He moved not just his body but his clothing, ensuring that even the loose fabric of his uniform avoided contact with the training beams. The arena had grown noticeably quieter. Conversations ceased as beings who had been paying minimal attention turned their focus to the demonstration platform. What they were witnessing challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between evolutionary advantages and combat effectiveness. The 5th and 6th drones modified their approach, attempting to overwhelm the target through sheer volume of fire. Their weapons cycled at maximum sustainable rates, filling the demonstration area with a web of energy beams and projectiles that should have been impossible for any organic being to navigate. The ninja moved through the attack pattern like a ghost, his body bending and twisting in ways that seemed to violate human anatomical limitations. He flowed under, over, and around obstacles that existed only in three-dimensional space, his movement suggesting an understanding of combat geometry that the galaxy's military experts had never encountered. More troubling to the observers was the growing certainty that the human was not simply reacting to attacks but predicting them. His movement began before weapons fired. His positioning anticipated angles of attack that hadn't yet been calculated by the drone's targeting systems. "Impossible," whispered Captain Mordak, his crystalline structure refracting light in patterns that indicated deep confusion among his people. "Nothing can predict automated weapons systems with that level of precision." The demonstration reached its climax as all 6 drones coordinated a final assault, their combined firepower sufficient to overwhelm any individual opponent through sheer mathematical certainty. Energy beams converged on the ninja's position from every possible angle, creating a sphere of destructive force that eliminated all possibility of evasion. For a moment that stretched into eternity, it appeared that the Galactic representatives had been correct about human limitations. Then Shadow 7 did something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. He disappeared. The silence in the grand amphitheater was absolute. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy stared at an empty demonstration platform where a human had stood moments before. The 6 combat drones continued their pre-programmed sweeping patterns, their sensors frantically searching for a target that their instruments insisted was still present, but which their optical arrays could no longer locate. High Chancellor Vex Mara leaned forward in her seat, her ancient eyes scanning the arena floor. "Where did it go?" The question rippled through the crowd in dozens of languages. Beings with enhanced sensory capabilities activated their most sophisticated detection equipment. The thermal hunters of Scorius Prime, whose vision extended deep into the infrared spectrum, found no heat signature. The echo speakers, who could track movement through minute atmospheric disturbances, detected no displacement patterns. Commander Zextai's personal scanner ran through every detection protocol in its memory banks. "Impossible," he muttered. "No stealth technology exists that could fool our combined sensor arrays." The combat drone suddenly began malfunctioning. The first unit simply stopped moving, its energy projector powering down as if commanded by its operator. The second drone's targeting system began spinning wildly, unable to lock onto anything in its sensor range. Within moments, all 6 units had ceased functioning, not through damage, but through what appeared to be systematic shutdown of their operational systems. Then, as if materializing from nothingness itself, Shadow 7 reappeared in the center of the platform. He stood precisely where he had been when the final attack began, his breathing unlabored, his clothing unmarked by any contact with the energy weapons. In his hands he held 6 small electronic components, each taken from the internal systems of the combat drones during their coordinated assault. The implications struck the Galactic representatives like a physical blow. He was inside their defense perimeter, whispered General Voss, his mandibles trembling with disbelief. During the attack, he moved through their formation and disabled each unit individually. Admiral Nexus's tentacles writhed in patterns that indicated extreme agitation among her species. The timing required, he would have had to move between all 6 drones in the span of less than 2 seconds, extract components from their internal systems, and return to his original position. While invisible, added Captain Mordak, his crystalline form flickering with colors that had no names in standard galactic language. He accomplished all of this while completely undetectable to our most advanced sensor systems. High Chancellor Vex Mara, activated her personal communication array, connecting directly to the arena's security systems. Replay the last 30 seconds of combat footage from every available angle. Maximum resolution all-spectrum analysis. The massive holographic displays throughout the arena began showing the attack sequence from multiple perspectives. Frame by frame, the recordings revealed what organic eyes had missed. Between one instant and the next, the ninja had moved not around the energy beams but through them, his body somehow occupying the microscopic gaps between photons traveling at light speed. The analysis revealed something even more disturbing. During the 2-second window when he had been invisible, Shadow 7 had not simply disabled the drones. He had moved through each one's position, removed specific components with surgical precision, and somehow avoided triggering any of their proximity sensors or defensive systems. "Look at Drone 4, commanded Admiral Nexus, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Display its internal schematic." The hologram showed a complex military-grade combat unit with multiple layers of protective systems. The component that had been removed was located deep within the drone's armored core, accessible only through a maintenance hatch that required specialized tools to open. He opened the maintenance hatch, removed the component, and closed the hatch again, she continued. During active combat, while under fire from the other 5 units, in complete darkness while maintaining perfect stealth, the crowd began to murmur with growing unease. What they had witnessed challenged not just their assumptions about human capabilities, but their understanding of what was physically possible within the known laws of the universe. Commander Zextai accessed the drone's manufacturer specifications. The maintenance hatch requires a specific electromagnetic pulse sequence to unlock. The code changes every few hours for security purposes. How could a primitive species possibly know the current access code? Shadow 7 had moved to the edge of the platform, once again standing in perfect stillness. To most observers, he appeared to be waiting for further instruction. Those with more sophisticated understanding of combat recognized something different in his posture. He was not waiting. He was ready. Ready for whatever level of challenge the Galactic representatives chose to provide next. The ninja's demonstration had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it had fundamentally altered the dynamic in the grand amphitheater. Conversations that had been filled with mockery and dismissal now carried undertones of confusion and concern. Betting pools that had refused to accept wagers on human victory were suddenly being overwhelmed with requests for odds calculations. High Chancellor Vexmara found herself faced with an unprecedented situation. The preliminary test had been designed to provide a graceful exit for species that were clearly outclassed by galactic military standards. Instead, it had revealed capabilities that exceeded those of most advanced civilizations. "I propose we advance to the second tier of testing," she announced, though her voice carried uncertainty. "Combat against live opponents rather than automated systems." The suggestion caused immediate debate throughout the arena. The second tier was typically reserved for proven warriors, beings whose species had demonstrated consistent military excellence over centuries of galactic conflict. It involved actual combat against volunteers from other participating species, with safeguards to prevent permanent injury, but few other limitations on tactics or intensity. "With respect, Chancellor," called Commander Zextai, "perhaps we should consider what we have learned here. This human has demonstrated abilities that appear to violate established physical laws. Placing him in direct combat with our warriors might not be advisable." General Voss disagreed, his warrior instincts overriding his caution. "One impressive display against training drones proves nothing about combat against thinking opponents. My people have faced every type of warrior the galaxy has produced. No single individual, regardless of their species' tricks, can stand against a Korthani heavy assault specialist." The debate continued for several minutes, with representatives arguing both sides of the question. Some urged caution, suggesting that further study was needed before escalating the challenges. Others insisted that real combat was the only way to properly assess the human's capabilities. Shadow 7 remained motionless throughout the discussion, apparently unconcerned with the outcome. His stillness was not passive waiting but active preparation. Every second of the debate allowed him to study his potential opponents, analyzing their movement patterns, identifying their species-specific advantages and limitations, calculating the most efficient methods for neutralizing threats he might soon face. The decision was made when Champion Thorak of the Vraxian Empire stepped forward, his massive form dominating the arena floor. "I volunteer for the honor of testing this human's abilities against a true warrior." The crowd erupted in approval. Thorak was legendary even among the Vraxians, his combat record including victories against opponents from dozens of different species. His natural armor had never been penetrated by conventional weapons, and his claws could cut through materials that most species considered indestructible. High Chancellor Vexamara looked from the towering alien warrior to the motionless human figure. The contrast was so extreme it bordered on the absurd. Thorak stood 3 meters tall and weighed nearly half a ton. His scales could deflect energy weapons, and his physical strength exceeded that of most mechanical systems. "Very well," she announced. "Let us see what humanity truly has to offer." Champion Thorak stepped into the combat arena with the confidence of a warrior who had never known defeat. His massive frame cast shadows across the platform as he flexed claws that had torn through starship armor. Battle scars crisscrossed his scales, each one a testament to conflicts where his enemies had discovered the futility of opposing Vraxian might. He had fought the crystal warriors of Zeldin Prime, the phase shifters of the quantum realm, and the energy beings of the stellar core. None had presented a challenge worthy of his full attention. The arena's environmental systems adjusted to accommodate the upcoming combat, raising protective barriers around the audience seating and activating medical emergency protocols. Atmospheric processors began cycling fresh air to ensure optimal conditions for both participants, though most observers assumed this consideration would be unnecessary, given the anticipated brevity of the encounter. Shadow 7 stood at the opposite end of the platform, a figure so unremarkable that many spectators had difficulty tracking his position without direct focus. The contrast between the two combatants struck every observer as fundamentally ridiculous. Thorak's smallest claw was longer than the human's fingers, and his casual movements generated more kinetic force than the ninja's entire body mass could produce. High Chancellor Vexmara activated the arena's combat monitoring systems, ensuring that medical intervention would be immediate if the human sustained serious injury. She had presided over thousands of such encounters, but never one where the physical disparity between opponents approached these extremes. "Combat parameters are set to non-lethal," she announced, though the qualification seemed unnecessary. "First participant to achieve decisive incapacitation wins the encounter." Thorak acknowledged the rules with a casual nod, his attention already focused on calculating the most efficient method to end this farce without causing excessive damage to the fragile human. Perhaps a simple demonstration of overwhelming force would convince the primitive being to surrender before actual contact became necessary. The Vraxian champion began his assault with movements that would have been blindingly fast by most species standards but represented only a fraction of his true capabilities. His massive form crossed the platform in 3 ground-shaking strides, claws extended to deliver a strike that would incapacitate through sheer impact force rather than cutting damage. Shadow 7 moved like smoke dispersing in a gentle breeze. Thorak's claws passed through empty air, his momentum carrying him forward into space the human had occupied microseconds earlier. The champion's combat-trained reflexes immediately initiated a recovery sequence, his secondary arms reaching to grapple an opponent who should have been directly in front of him. The ninja was somehow behind him instead. A human hand touched the base of Thorak's skull with pressure so light it barely registered through his natural armor. The contact lasted less than 1/10 of a second before Shadow 7 flowed away, resuming his position at the far end of the platform as if nothing had occurred. Thorak spun around, confusion evident in his reptilian features. The touch had been meaningless, incapable of penetrating his defensive scales or affecting his neurological systems. Yet something was wrong. A strange tingling sensation was spreading from the point of contact, not painful but oddly disorienting. The champion shook his head to clear his thoughts and launched a second attack, this time employing tactics developed through centuries of combat against elusive opponents. His claws carved through the air in overlapping patterns designed to eliminate all possible escape routes, while his massive feet positioned to cut off retreat paths. Again, the human simply was not there when the attacks arrived. This time, Shadow 7's countertouch landed on Thorak's right shoulder, the same feather-light contact that seemed to accomplish nothing. The ninja's movement between positions remained incomprehensible to most observers. his body transitioning from one location to another through paths that defied three-dimensional mapping. The tingling sensation in Thorax's nervous system intensified, spreading down his right arm with increasing intensity, still not painful but undeniably present and growing stronger with each passing moment. The champion began to suspect that the human's touches were not as meaningless as they appeared. "What trickery is this?" Thorax demanded, his voice carrying clearly throughout the arena. "What manner of poison or technology do you employ?" Shadow 7 offered no response, his expression unchanged by either the accusation or the growing frustration evident in the alien warrior's posture. The ninja's silence was not born of contempt, but of complete focus on the combat situation, his consciousness dedicated entirely to analyzing his opponent's movements and calculating optimal response patterns. Thorax's third assault incorporated lessons learned from the previous exchanges. Instead of attempting to track the human's impossible movements, he would deny them entirely. The champion spread his forearms wide and began spinning in a controlled rotation, his claws creating a sphere of destruction that would encompass the entire platform. No being could survive within that whirlwind of cutting edges. Regardless of their mobility advantages, the attack was flawless in conception and execution, representing tactical thinking developed over 3 centuries of military experience. Thorax's rotation speed increased until he became a blur of scales and claws, the sound of air displacement reaching dangerous decibel levels. Shadow 7 stepped forward and entered the whirlwind. The impossible happened for the third time that day. Instead of being shredded by the spinning claws, the ninja moved through the spaces between them as if following a choreographed dance. His body bent and twisted around the cutting edges with precision, measured in fractions of millimeters, never quite making contact with the deadly weapons but always present within their arc of destruction. More impossibly still, during his passage through the whirlwind, Shadow 7 delivered 7 additional touches to specific points on Thorax's massive form. Each contact was precisely placed and perfectly timed, occurring during the microsecond windows, when the spinning warrior's own momentum prevented defensive reactions. When Thorax finally ceased his rotation, staggering slightly from dizziness, the strange tingling sensation had spread throughout his entire body. What had begun as a minor distraction was now actively interfering with his motor control, causing delays between his brain's commands and his muscles' responses. The champion looked down at his hands, watching his fingers move sluggishly when he attempted to flex them. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. The human had not been delivering meaningless touches but precise strikes to his nervous system's pressure points. "Impossible," he whispered, though his voice carried clearly in the silent arena. "My species has no pressure points vulnerable to such techniques. Our neurological structure is completely different from primitive humanoid anatomy." Shadow 7 spoke for the first time since entering the arena, his voice calm and carrying no trace of exertion despite the extraordinary display of physical capability he had just demonstrated. "All nervous systems share certain fundamental characteristics," he said, his words translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. "Pressure points are not anatomical features but intersection points of bioelectric energy flow. They exist in every living being, regardless of evolutionary origin." The implications of this statement rippled through the audience like a shockwave. The human had not only identified vulnerable points in an alien anatomy he had never encountered before, but had done so while engaged in combat against an opponent whose physical advantages should have made such precision impossible. Thorax attempted to launch another attack, but his body betrayed him. The tingling sensation had progressed to active paralysis, his massive limbs responding with increasingly obvious delays to his conscious commands. Each movement required tremendous effort to initiate and became progressively more difficult to control. "You have studied our anatomy," he accused, though his voice lacked conviction. This encounter was predetermined through espionage and preparation. "I have never encountered your species before today," Shadow 7 replied truthfully. "The techniques I am employing were developed by human warriors over a period of more than 1,000 years. They are based on principles that apply to all forms of biological consciousness." The ninja began walking slowly toward the paralyzed champion, his movement deliberate and unthreatening, but somehow more intimidating than any display of aggressive intent could have been. Thorax's warrior instinct screamed warnings that his body was no longer capable of heeding. The grand amphitheater had descended into chaos, Champion Thorak, the undefeated warrior of the Vraxian Empire, lay motionless on the arena floor, his massive form completely paralyzed by techniques that should not have been possible to apply to his alien anatomy. Medical teams rushed onto the platform, their scanners detecting no injury or damage but confirming total temporary nervous system disruption. High Chancellor Vex Mara stood frozen at her observation post, her ancient mind struggling to process what she had witnessed. In over 2 millennia of galactic civilization, no single individual had ever demonstrated the ability to defeat a champion-level warrior from one of the apex predator species using only physical techniques. The audience response ranged from stunned silence to heated arguments about the legitimacy of what they had observed. Representatives from dozens of species activated their communication arrays, urgently transmitting reports to their homeworlds about the unprecedented display of human capability. General Voss approached the Chancellor's position, his mandibles clicking in patterns that indicated extreme agitation. This cannot be allowed to stand. The implications for galactic military balance are too severe. If humans possess these capabilities, every strategic calculation for the past 1,000 years becomes obsolete. Admiral Nexus coiled her tentacles in agreement. My analysis indicates that the techniques demonstrated could potentially be applied against any biological life form. No species in the consortium would be immune to such methods. Commander Zextai was studying detailed scans of the paralyzed thorax, his expression growing more troubled by the moment. The medical teams report that the paralysis is already beginning to fade. No permanent damage has been inflicted. The human could have killed our champion at any moment during the encounter, but chose restraint instead. This observation sent new waves of fear through the assembled representatives. A warrior capable of killing but choosing mercy was infinitely more dangerous than one who simply destroyed opponents through overwhelming force. It suggested tactical thinking that exceeded military considerations and entered the realm of political strategy. High Chancellor Vex Mara made a decision that would later be debated in academic circles for centuries. Instead of ending the demonstration and calling for extended study of human capabilities, she chose to escalate the challenge to its maximum possible level. "I invoke the protocol of ultimate assessment," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the arena. "The human will face 5 opponents simultaneously, each representing a different category of evolved combat specialization. The protocol had been established centuries earlier for situations where a single individual's capabilities might fundamentally alter the balance of galactic power. It had never been invoked as no being had ever demonstrated abilities that warranted such extreme testing. Shadow 7 stood at the center of the platform, apparently unmoved by the escalation in challenge level. His breathing remained controlled, his posture unchanged from the moment he had entered the arena hours earlier. To most observers, he appeared completely unaffected by the physical and mental demands of the previous encounters. The 5 champions selected for the ultimate assessment represented evolutionary paths that had produced the galaxy's most dangerous warriors. Each had volunteered immediately upon hearing the protocol invocation, their species' pride and military reputation at stake. Krethak of the Shadow Hunters materialized first, her natural camouflage abilities making her barely visible even under the arena's enhanced lighting. Her species had evolved perfect stealth capabilities over millions of years of predatory evolution, becoming living embodiments of death from darkness. Next came Vorgath the Unyielding, a representative of the Iron Bone clans whose skeletal structure incorporated living metal that could reshape itself for optimal combat effectiveness. His punches could shatter starship hulls, and his defensive capabilities rivaled military-grade armor plating. The 3rd champion was Zephyra of the Storm Dancers, her energy-based physiology allowing her to exist partially outside normal dimensional constraints. She could phase through solid matter at will and discharge devastating electrical attacks that could disable entire enemy formations. Mordoon the Inevitable took his position with mechanical precision, his cybernetic enhancements representing the ultimate fusion of organic evolution and technological advancement. His reaction times exceeded those of pure artificial intelligence, and his integrated weapons systems could engage multiple targets simultaneously with perfect accuracy. Finally, Thalavos the Ancient stepped onto the platform, his presence immediately noticeable to every psychically sensitive being in the arena. As one of the rare mind weavers, he possessed telepathic abilities that could paralyze opponents through direct mental assault, making physical combat unnecessary in most encounters. The 5 champions arranged themselves in a perfect pentagon around the motionless ninja, each maintaining optimal distance for their species-specific combat techniques. Together, they represented nearly every advantage that galactic evolution had produced: perfect stealth, invulnerable defense, dimensional manipulation, technological enhancement, and psychic domination. High Chancellor Vexmara's voice carried a weight of finality as she initiated the ultimate assessment. This encounter will determine whether humanity represents a significant factor in galactic military considerations. All combat limitations are removed except the prohibition against permanent termination. Shadow 7 closed his eyes. The gesture seemed to indicate surrender or preparation for meditation, but several observers with advanced understanding of combat dynamics recognized it as something far more dangerous. The ninja was not retreating inward but expanding outward, his consciousness encompassing the entire arena environment in ways that most species could not comprehend. When he opened his eyes 3 seconds later, they held a focus that seemed to pierce through dimensional barriers themselves. For the first time since arriving at Nexus Prime, Shadow 7 appeared to be engaging his full capabilities, rather than simply responding to immediate challenges. The battle began without warning or ceremony. All 5 champions attacked simultaneously, their combined assault representing the pinnacle of galactic military evolution. Krethak struck from stealth, her claws aimed at pressure points that should have been fatal to any humanoid. Forgath charged with unstoppable momentum, his metallic fists creating sonic booms as they displaced air. Zephyra phased partially out of normal space, her electrical discharge building to lethal intensities. Morden's targeting systems locked onto the human from multiple angles, his integrated weapons preparing to deliver precise strikes that would incapacitate without killing. Thalvos launched a psychic assault designed to overwhelm the primitive human nervous system and render physical combat irrelevant. Shadow 7 moved through the 5-pronged attack like wind passing through a forest. His body somehow found paths between claws that struck from stealth, momentum that should have been unstoppable, electrical discharges that occupied multiple dimensions, projectiles that traveled faster than thought, and mental assaults that should have paralyzed any conscious being. But more impossibly still, as he moved through the combined attack, the ninja began his counter-assault. His hands touched each of the 5 champions in turn, the same precise pressure point strikes he had used against Thorak, but delivered while navigating the most complex combat scenario in recorded galactic history. The entire exchange lasted 4.7 seconds. When the movement ceased, all 5 champions stood motionless around the ninja, their bodies betraying them as the paralysis took effect. Shadow 7 remained at the center of their formation, unmarked by any of their attacks, his breathing still controlled and his expression unchanged. The silence that followed was absolute and profound, carrying implications that would reshape galactic civilization for generations to come. The aftermath of the ultimate assessment stretched beyond the grand amphitheater and into the corridors of galactic power. Within hours, emergency sessions, convened on hundreds of worlds as civilizations that had dominated space for millennia, grappled with the reality that their fundamental assumptions about military supremacy had been shattered by a single, human High Chancellor Vexmara stood beside the medical teams working to restore function to the 5 paralyzed champions. Each was receiving the finest treatment available in the galaxy, though the medics reported that the paralysis was already fading naturally without intervention. Whatever techniques the ninja had employed were precise enough to disable without causing lasting damage, a level of control that impressed the medical community as much as it terrified the military observers. Shadow 7 remained at the center of the platform, his posture unchanged, despite having engaged in the most demanding combat scenario any individual had ever survived. Medical scanners trained on him showed completely normal vital signs, no elevation in heart rate, no indication of physical stress or fatigue. It was as if the encounter had required no more effort than casual conversation. Commander Zextai approached the ninja cautiously, his natural warrior's instincts warning him to maintain respectful distance from a being whose capabilities had exceeded every parameter in their understanding of combat effectiveness. "What are you?" he asked, his voice carrying none of the mockery that had characterized his earlier assessments of humanity. "I am a student," Shadow 7 replied simply, his first word since the battle had ended. "My training continues each day, as it has for over 4 decades. What you have witnessed represents perhaps 1% of what human martial arts can achieve with sufficient dedication." The implications struck the assembled representatives like a physical blow. If this demonstration represented only a fraction of human potential, their species possessed capabilities that could revolutionize galactic warfare or render it completely obsolete. General Voss, his mandibles no longer clicking with amusement, but trembling with something approaching fear, voiced the question that dominated every mind present. "How many more like you exist?" "My particular school maintains 13 active practitioners at my level or above," Shadow 7 answered truthfully. "However, there are dozens of other schools throughout human space, each with different specializations and techniques. Some focus on technological integration, others on environmental adaptation, still others on group combat dynamics. Admiral Nexus's tentacles coiled and uncoiled in patterns that indicated severe distress among her species. "You are saying that humanity possesses hundreds of individuals with capabilities equivalent to what we have witnessed here?" "The number would be closer to several thousand," the ninja corrected gently, "though each practitioner's abilities vary according to their chosen discipline and natural aptitude. Not all human warriors specialize in the techniques you have observed today." High Chancellor Vexamara felt the weight of 2 millennia of accumulated wisdom pressing down upon her. In her long lifetime, she had presided over the rise and fall of entire civilizations, witnessed the development of technologies that reshaped reality itself, and observed evolutionary leaps that redefined what it meant to be alive in the cosmos. Nothing in her experience had prepared her for this moment. "Why?" she asked, her ancient voice barely audible in the vast arena. "Why did your species conceal these capabilities? Why allow the galaxy to believe you were primitive and weak?" Shadow 7 considered the question for several moments before responding. "We did not conceal our abilities. Your representatives observed exactly what they chose to see. You requested demonstrations of genetic advantages and evolutionary adaptations, so we sent someone who possessed neither. You assumed that physical superiority determined combat effectiveness, so we provided an alternative perspective." The simple honesty of the answer was somehow more disturbing than any deception would have been. Humanity had not hidden their capabilities through elaborate schemes or false information. They had simply allowed the galaxy's preconceptions to blind them to possibilities they had never considered. The techniques I have demonstrated today were developed by humans who faced opponents stronger, faster, and more naturally gifted than themselves, Shadow 7 continued. "Over centuries they learned that victory does not belong to the most powerful, but to those who best understand the nature of conflict itself." Captain Mordek's crystalline structure flickered through color, patterns that had no translation in any known language, his species' equivalent of profound philosophical contemplation. "You are saying that your apparent disadvantages became advantages through the application of knowledge and skill?" "Every limitation contains the seed of transcendence," the ninja replied. "Humans learn to exceed the boundaries of their physical forms through mental and spiritual development. What you consider weaknesses, we transformed into strengths through centuries of dedicated practice." The paralyzed champions were beginning to show signs of recovery, their nervous systems slowly regaining normal function under the careful monitoring of medical teams. Champion Thorak was the first to regain speech, his voice carrying a respect that had been entirely absent from their initial encounter. "I have fought warriors from across the galaxy," he said slowly, his words still slightly slurred by residual paralysis. "None have ever bested me through skill alone. Your victory was not achieved through superior strength or speed, but through understanding that exceeded my own." Shadow 7 nodded acknowledgement of the compliment. "Combat is ultimately a conversation between opponents. Victory belongs to the one who understands the language being spoken." High Chancellor Vexmar realized that the demonstration had accomplished far more than simply proving human combat capabilities. It had revealed fundamental flaws in the galaxy's approach to military thinking, strategic planning, and species assessment. Every assumption about the relationship between evolution and effectiveness would need to be reconsidered. "What does humanity want?" she asked, framing the question that would determine galactic policy for generations to come. What are your species' intentions regarding the consortium and our military structure? We seek only the same thing we have always sought, Shadow 7 replied. The opportunity to learn, to grow, and to contribute to the betterment of all conscious beings. Our martial traditions teach that true strength lies not in dominating others but in protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The ninja's words carried implications that reached beyond military considerations into the realm of political philosophy. A species that had developed the capability to defeat any opponent but chose to use that power for protection rather than conquest represented a paradigm that most galactic civilizations had never encountered. General Voss found his voice first among the military representatives. If humanity were to share these techniques to train instructors for other species, knowledge shared freely multiplies its benefits, Shadow 7 agreed. But such training requires dedication that few are willing to provide. The path we follow demands the sacrifice of entire lifetimes to achieve mastery. Not all beings or cultures are prepared for such commitment. As medical teams helped the recovered champions to their feet, the arena began to empty slowly. Representatives hurried away to compose reports that would reshape their civilization's understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy. The mockery and dismissal that had characterized their initial attitudes had been replaced by something approaching reverence. High Chancellor Vex Mara approached Shadow 7 as the crowd dispersed, her ancient features reflecting the profound changes this day had brought to her understanding of the cosmos. The Galactic Defense Consortium would be honored to offer humanity leadership positions commensurate with your demonstrated capabilities. The ninja bowed respectfully, the gesture carrying none of the submission that most species associated with such movements, but rather indicating mutual respect between equals. We are honored by the offer and will consider it carefully. However, true leadership is earned through service rather than demonstrations of power. Perhaps it would be better to begin with cooperation and see what develops naturally. As Shadow 7 walked away from the platform, his movement once again so quiet as to be nearly undetectable, the assembled beings realized that everything had changed. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through force or technology, but through the simple demonstration that apparent limitations could be transcended through dedication, wisdom, and the patient accumulation of knowledge. The age of genetic superiority and evolutionary advantage had ended, replaced by something far more dangerous and far more hopeful, the age of unlimited potential achieved through discipline and understanding. In the depths of space, aboard the small, unremarkable vessel that had brought him to this moment, Shadow 7 began composing his report to the hidden masters who had guided humanity's development for over 1,000 years. The galaxy was ready for the next phase of human involvement in galactic civilization. The real demonstration was just beginning.